All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Invest in Your Workforce for 2023. My name is Marla DeVries and I'm excited to have you with us for the next 45 minutes or so. While you are acclimating yourself to being part of a webinar, I want to encourage you to go ahead and use the chat to introduce yourself and the organization you're with. And also want to encourage you to liberally use the chat during our conversation today. It's always hard when it's you don't see the Hollywood squares of people in a webinar. And so to make this as interactive as possible, please use the chat for comments, as well as you can use the Q&A for questions, and we will respond to those near the end. As I mentioned, my name is Marla DeVries. I'm the Chief Learning Officer here at the Greenhouse Project. So I have the privilege of kind of all things education, and I am joined by my colleague Mary, and so I'm going to let Mary introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. I am Mary Hopner-Thomas, and I am the Education Coach here at the Greenhouse Project.
All right. So here's where we're headed today. Three big topics, and we appreciate when we think about investing in your workforce that we're kind of scratching the surface. But we're going to talk about what does it mean to rethink learning? What does it mean to be a learning organization? Or kind of having the other way of thinking about it is a whole organization responsibility for learning. And then one of my favorite expressions, which is this idea that learning is a process, not an event. We'll explore what that means and what are some tangible things that you can do to live out learning being a process, not an event. Before we get there, we put sobering statistics on this. So I thought it's important that let's ground ourselves in current reality. So here's just a few stats. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, nursing homes have lost 238,000 caregivers since the start of the pandemic. That is roughly 15% of the total workforce, a decline of 15%. And while when you think about healthcare more broadly, and you think about hospitals, physicians' offices, outpatient centers, they're all at or nearly at or have even surpassed their pre-pandemic staffing levels, but nursing homes are 15% below and assisted livings are 7% low the pre-pandemic staffing levels. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. And when you think about, when we talk about workforce, and we're going to certainly focus on training, a lot of numbers are thrown around, but the one that I like is the average cost to replace an employee is equivalent to about 30% of their salary. We know that it's costly, right? Anytime that we lose an employee or we have that lag time, it's costly. So we want to give you some practical solutions that can help with bottom line, but also can help with the culture. So let's explore how the harsh reality impacts our training. And Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you to do a couple polls related to that.
Right. So we've got two polls to start off with. So when you see these, Janet will put them up. You'll maybe need to, you might need to scroll down just a little bit. The first question is, and there's just pick one. So you just take a look at it and decide which one makes the most sense. So how has the pandemic and the workforce turnover impacted your organization's approach to training? So there's been no change to how we train. Our focus is on really compliance, mandatory in-service, or even our focus on mandatory education has been deprioritized, or we've actually expanded our approach to training, or the last one is training is not a priority at this time. The second question is, how satisfied are you with your organization's current approach to training? So you're either extremely satisfied, somewhat, neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, or somewhat dissatisfied. So just a chance to get a feel for the organizations that are on this webinar just to like see where you guys are all thinking. And we like to wait until we get like a good chunk of people. So hopefully you're all filling this out, and Janet will let us know like at that point when we can actually take a look at, where the results kind of fall. So I think that the pandemic has done quite a bit to all of us. And I think many of us are still just like kind of trying to get back into it. But I think the workforce is like that double whammy. So we'll see what you think. I feel like I need to have that Jeopardy like music.
You can
You
hum
don't
if
want
you
me
want.
singing, trust
Yeah.
me. Okay, so here we go. So I think that the largest is really our focus is on compliance and mandatory in-services. So that had the 35%, but then a close second runner-up is we have expanded our approach to training. So that's cool. That's nice to actually see that. And so I guess it just covers, a broad range. So the second one is actually, I'm going to see, can I actually move that? I can. So the second question, I guess the one was somewhat satisfied. So that's good too. I mean, thinking that you're feeling pretty good about what your organization is doing. And then there's a big chunk for neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. So always good to see kind of like where people are at. Any thoughts, comments, Marla, after seeing those?
Well, I would love for people to put in the chat that the 30% that said they've expanded their approach to training. I would love just a couple ideas of what they've done for that. And then I think the comment in terms of satisfaction is, yes, 38% are somewhat satisfied. If I'm doing the math correctly, 33% are somewhat dissatisfied or extremely dissatisfied. So we've really got kind of both ends there. And I guess it's not surprising because you joined a webinar about training. So very interesting.
I agree. Wonderful. Well, let's get started. So this slide actually says Rethink Learning, and I kind of like the quote that's in the upper right-hand corner from Ben Franklin. We really need to like move beyond compliance. So it's interesting that one person or, one of the answers talks about mandatory or just, the compliance. So we really, overall, the industry, long-term care just really needs to rethink how we approach education, how we're approaching learning. So we say it needs to be beyond compliance and that we need to move really that focus away from training as some kind of requirement or an obligation that has to happen. We really need to move into it as an investment. Really think in terms of this training is an investment in our care force. And when that happens, I think people feel much more valued. At Greenhouse, we always say, greenhouse, one word, grows plants. Greenhouse, two words, grows people. And that's really what we're in the business of, growing people. And then the third thing to think about is that this is really, learning itself is really a solution. That's why we have A in the green, just one solution to what is happening with that workforce crisis. Training alone is not going to solve it. It's really a complex, and again, like Marla said, you all know this, it's a very complex issue. There's a multitude of solutions, but learning and our approach to training and growing our workforce really should be one of those options that you're looking at. So this is really what's at stake or what's possible. We really need to shift our thinking and our approach to learning. So you can see the bullet points that are there. Studies have really shown that a good learning path for employees can really increase their level of engagement or their loyalty, boost morale, improve retention. Again, like I say, when someone invests in you, that you really feel valued then. And that says something from the organization's point of view. It will improve skills or knowledge. And with that, can come out those, improved skills along with improved quality of care, which is something we're all interested in. And then that overall better resident outcome so that you're thinking about not only employee satisfaction, family satisfaction, but what are the elders thinking? And when they feel that they have a care force that has really been trained, it's a better feeling. So the investment into care force training really can have huge payoffs if we invest in it. And now we're going to say that you need to think about shifting the way you believe that it is developed, what it is, and how it is delivered. So Marla, take them in.
I will, and I'm going to ask you, because I'm scrolling through the there's a few comments that have come in around expanded training. So I'm going to jump in, and then I'm hoping that you can scroll through those and share them in a little bit.
Ooh, yeah, we got lots of people who made comments.
Okay. So when it comes to rethinking learning, we could focus on what we learn or what we teach, or how we teach, how we approach learning. And we could also make this a 6-hour webinar and talk about either one of those. We're going to focus on the how we approach learning or training. And then we'll touch a little bit on the what, but the bulk of our conversation is going to be on how we look at training, how we approach it, who we involve, all of that. So we said that part of the discussion was going to be on being a learning organization. And so before I reveal on the slide what that means to us, or what that means to Peter Senge, I'd love for people to jump in the chat box. Mary has got her eyeballs on it. So to chat in, what does that mean to you to be a learning organization? So just jot down a couple things, and we'll see once if anything comes in. Mary, while we're waiting for that, what's come in around expanded training?
So a few people talked about that they've expanded online training opportunities, and some are okay, and some are, somewhat dissatisfied with it because it seems like it's a bit more of a default. And so people miss that, that actual in-person kind of training that has gone on. Another person said meeting the employees where they are versus asking them to come in, real flexibility, that kind of thing. So
okay. So I'm seeing, in terms of being a learning organization, it looks like continuous, ongoing, finding ways to teach outside of the classroom. Learning is vital for optimum care as well as content staff. Ongoing and varied, so speakers, online workshops, ongoing self-assessment, networking, sharing findings with others, education from multiple sources on a continual basis, to be free to raise thoughts about how we might improve aspects of what we do. Are you finding some more, Mary? I'll let you, they just keep coming in. There's too many to, yeah.
Yeah, I think that one says, I would say that by means the leaders are consistently learning and passing along the way of best practices. Also hoping that, that means investing in the care people to continue their career path. So,
right. So that's that investment that you were talking about. So here's one explanation, and I mentioned Peter Senge. So being a learning organization is not a new concept. And it really flourished back in the 90s with his book, The Fifth Discipline. And so, there's certain words for me that stick out. And it's really about helping to continually expand their capacity, new and expansive patterns of thinking that are nurtured, and learning to see the whole together. So that whole idea of that systems thinking. And then here's another that we can add to it. And this one talks about involvement, collaboration, collective accountability, where change is directed to shared values or principles. So it's like, when you hear involvement, collaboration, collective accountability, it's really talking about an empowered culture. So the connection between a learning organization and having an empowered culture. As I was preparing for this webinar, I also found a great article in Harvard Business Review, and it caught my attention because it's, is yours a learning organization? And they identified 3 building blocks. And so I'm going to go through them quickly. A supportive learning environment, and there's 4 components to that. A concrete learning process and practices, so something that's systematic, intentional, planned, right? It doesn't just happen. And then leadership that reinforces the learning. And so we're going to piggyback because those are very similar themes to what we're going to talk about. And we're going to start with this logic of training. And so I want to review it, and I want you to think about your own organization and kind of where do you focus your attention on this path, and then what success do you find? So this isn't, I don't think, difficult to understand. You have a learner at number 1 who lacks a skill, a knowledge, or perhaps an attitude that needs to be shifted. And so the learner then goes to a learning or intervention. So a training, whether that's online, whether that's in person, a training takes place. Then number 3 is they gain some mastery of that skill, knowledge, attitude. 4 is they put it into practice in the workplace. And once they do that, 5 is you see some results. The application produces results on a larger scale. And then 6, the final component is the results add value to the organization. So it's a pretty simple way of thinking about it. And I was thinking about a couple different examples. So one might be a CNA that attends an infection control training, and they learn how to master donning and doffing PPE. I'm not a clinician, so I'm not going to pretend to be one. But so that number 3 is they master being able to appropriately do that. And then number 4 is that CNA then utilizes that new knowledge working in that neighborhood or that COVID unit. And then 5 is infection control standards are maintained. And then what's the impact of that? Well, number 6 might be that they have less waste of PPE. There's cost savings that way. Maybe there's a lower hospital transfer rate. Infection rate is lower. So that's the real kind of ROI that happens. And I think oftentimes what we see is we think that number 2 is the goal instead of all the way at number 6. We focus on 2 and we say, check, we've gotten people through training, and that's the goal in itself. And so I love this quote, which is the value does not come from exposure to the training, but to the performance change that it leads to. And we have to keep that in mind. We don't do training just for the sake of training. And sometimes we might do training just for the sake of compliance. But the real benefit of it is that it has an impact, a positive impact on the organization. And as I mentioned, it could be financial, it could be quality of life, it could be survey. There's a lot of different ROI that we can see there. It could be that retention, but to be focused on what's the value that it brings to the organization. So we're going to do another poll, and we're going to look at how we invest time and resources in training. And, as some of you indicated, training has taken a hit in the last couple years. And I want you to think about your organization and how you typically devote time and resources. And there's three options. So it's what, in terms of pre-training, what percentage of time, resources, planning do we allocate during the training? So the training itself, whether that's classroom training or online training or even kind of one-on-one training, and then post-training interventions. So you have 4 different options. One is it's a pretty even split across the board. One is that 10% pre, 85% of resources and time and energy in 85% during, and then just 5% post. And then you see the two other options. So I'm going to give you a moment, think about your organization and how you typically allocate resources, planning, effort in these three categories. And Janet, you can share the poll whenever we've gotten enough people on. It's probably not something that you think about every day. I'm very curious, Mary.
I know, it'll be interesting to see where people land, because I think, I don't know, all organizations have different approaches and the ability to do different things. So.
I should mention, a lot of the information that we're sharing comes from a book called Courageous Training. It's become one of my favorites in terms of how we approach training. All right, so survey says the majority of people say that their organization does a 20-60-20 split, with another 32% that says it's that 10%, 85%, 5%. All right. And then 18 have that even split, and then only 5% had that bottom one with that 40-20-40. All right. So here's what's typical to most organizations. So some of you are in this category, right? So 10% of our effort is focused on pre-training, 85% on in the actual training, and 5% post-training. And I'll add from my own experience, that's kind of how I cut my teeth in training. I've been doing training since about 1998. And my strategy was put all of my attention in the actual classroom training, do the best job I could, and then hope for the best when they left. And when we think about how do we really maximize training, there is a different way. And so we're going to talk about what that is to have this high impact learning to performance approach. So the next poll is going to be, well, what's the ideal? You know what, you have an understanding of what you do in your organization, but what really is the ideal distribution of resources? If you were able to do that, what would you do for your organization? Again, it's the same options that you found in the first poll, so I'll give you a chance to make your selection. I'm equally curious about this one, Mary.
It's so funny when you talked about courageous training. I thought, when we were talking the other day, I actually pulled my book out, brought it in just in case if, when I was studying today, I thought, might need it.
Yes. Some of us are real thinkers when we have the magic wand and we get to make those decisions ourselves. All right. So majority say that even split makes sense. The next one is the 20-40-20 split, but followed closely by the 40-20-40 split. And then 5% said, let's keep it like it is, which is that 85%. So the bulk of time and attention into the training itself. All right. So it's like survey says, here's what the ideal is. A 40-20-40 split, which again, when I learned this was very surprising to me to say, really only 20% of our resources and effort and attention is going to be put in the actual training itself. What in the world do we do in that pre-training and post-training? And that's really what we're going to be exploring as we go together for the rest of the time. And it's really toggling between being a learning organization and that whole organization responsibility, and then looking at learning as a process, not an event. When you look at it as an event, you tend to put all of your chips into that during the training bucket, and you don't worry about the pre and the post. But when you see it more as a process, then there's a lot of things actually that we can do pre-training and post-training to have that thread of continuity together. So there are 4 key players for getting value from training. I don't think that this is necessarily so revolutionary to say that different people have different responsibilities in training, but I think figuring out specifically what each person's role is and what they can do, what they should do, and how do we equip them to be successful, I think that might be perhaps some new information. Typically, I would say we think about the bottom 2 as being responsible for learning. The role of the trainer, certainly, and the role of the learner. And so we're going to explore what does that mean for the senior leaders and managers of training as well, and what are some specific things that they can do and that we can do to equip them for success. So Mary, why don't you lead us through the senior leaders?
So I think some people may think like, well, wait, senior leaders being important in this process? I think it really has a lot to do with that. And I think that there are different actions, and just by the role and their commitment to the training can really have some significant impact on what's going to happen. So the slide is broken up into 4 pieces. So it's that overall picture, what is the training, really meant to accomplish, and how do we want that to impact our culture? I think that's where senior leadership, it really has that vision and can really take that and interpret it and apply it to what the training is. What's the education? What do people need in order to work in this organization? And then the next one is neutralize threats, which sounds so, it sounds like wartime or whatever, but we're really saying it's like being that barrier buster, being the person who can actually intervene and make sure that things are not going to derail the efforts of the education or the training, because so often that can happen, especially when it's really being rolled out across a company. And so I think it's important for the leadership to really work on that. And then it's really holding the managers accountable. And then I want to say, while supporting the managers. So you really want to be that leader that is very clear in tying what that educational initiative is to what the business plan has and what those goals and the mission is. And so to really help the managers understand that so that they in turn can actually take and help their people. The high engagement is really making sure that the leader takes ownership before, during, and after. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're right there during the education, but I can see a big difference when there's an education going on and the CEO or the COO walks in and actually talks to the group and talks about how important this is. It gives it that different level. And so I think the commitment on the part of senior leaders is truly very important. I think another way to do that is to really attach your name to the initiative, like when it's actually being rolled out, to really talk about it in meetings, make sure that, the other meetings that you're having among, the other leaders in your organization so that they understand where it's coming from in terms of how you see that training. And then the other thing that really needs to happen in terms of making time is that, whoever the trainer educator is, they need to have like regular ongoing conversations with, senior leaders so that they understand what they're looking for and that the trainer educator can actually express what they're working on. So a number of different areas where senior leaders really, really play a role.
You're right. And I wonder how often that happens right now. How often do senior leaders and learning and development trainers have that very specific interaction? That's something to assess at the organization. I just have to say, I keep getting a little distracted by the chat box. There's some wonderful things coming in. And we'll get to some of these post-training strategies, but I love what Pam wrote. She said, reinforcement on a regular basis is critical. It's not set it and forget it. But there's just a lot of learning within the context of the benefits for all the organization's goals. And then there was also somebody who did catch our math error. That was a test, Michelle. No, not really. I did have a 20, 40, 20 split, which only gives us 80%. So good catch.
Michelle, what does Michelle win then?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Who knows? All right, so let's move on. Managers of learners. And I would, as I said before, I think we generally don't think about them being responsible for learning. And yet the more that I've gotten into this, the more I see they're really the critical linchpin to the successful application of training. And so you see on the slide, the 4 main things that they do. So first of all, they prepare the learner to learn. Part of that is communicating the vision that's set by, as Mary talked about, set by the senior leaders. So they let them know what the training is about that they're going to be going to, why it's important. Mary and I were talking before this, it's like, how often do you, those of you that are trainers, how often do you have a class and people say things like, I don't know why I'm here, my manager just told me to come. I just had to show up. And so there's been nothing done to kind of, get the soil, warm the soil for the learning to happen. And so that is part of the role of the manager, is to prepare them and then to motivate them, set expectations for what the learning outcomes are. When you come back, this is going to be expected of you. This is how you're going to be able to live out what you've just learned. And this is, how I will hold you accountable. And then applying the learning. And this really is a dialogue between the learner or the manager and the learner to say, how will we apply this together? And it's really it's part of a pre-meeting, and then there's that follow-up that happens at the end to hold them accountable. So you went through this. What barriers do you see? And how can I help to hold you accountable? And that's where it's really an opportunity for some significant coaching by that manager. So because this is, I think for a lot of managers, this is new territory, there are things that we can do to set managers up for success. And when I say we, I mean those of us that are those trainers or educators, things that we can do. So the first thing is to share the why. Why is it important that your team goes through this training? And the why is going to be different depending on the leader that you're speaking with. So if you're speaking with charge nurses, that message might be different than if you're speaking to someone in dietary or activities. So it's really tailoring the message. It's the WIFM, the what's in it for me, what's in it for our department, how is this going to benefit us? And then to familiarize them with the training. That doesn't mean that you have to teach them the training. It might mean that you teach them the training. There are some real benefits to having managers and senior leaders go through the same training that you would have hands-on care partners go through. And then finally, it's to prepare and motivate them to have those pre and post meetings with the learners. There are things, impact maps, they call them, to help managers to be able to identify, okay, here's what they're going to learn. Here's the application that's going to be expected. Here's how I can hold them accountable. It's really forging this partnership between the managers and the trainers to make this happen. And then there's the trainers themselves. And so we're saying, obviously, we would all expect that they would be one of the key players in this, but it's a much more expanded role. I heard it described as they're like the maestro, right? And so they're conducting all of these different groups to make sure that they are playing their part and are being engaged in that process. We talked about the role that they would have in that pre-meeting with the senior leadership to really hear the vision and connect the training with the vision to talk about what's the real return on investment, what's the application that's going to happen. Those tools for managers we talked about. So that's that pre-training work. Then they conduct the training. And I think there's always opportunities to think of how are we doing this in a way that is utilizing adult learning principles, that's helping the learner to be in the driver's seat, to really engaging the learner into being an active participant during the training, to be talking with the learners about what barriers do you see, what obstacles do you see, and how can you communicate those back to your manager so that they can be, those barriers can be busted so that they can apply the learning. And then finally, that post-training follow-up, which will be support to managers. It's also going to be looking at the evaluation. So how successful were we? Did we achieve the vision that was established by senior leadership? Did we have those outcomes in that logic of learning, that number 6? Did we achieve the outcomes that we hoped we would achieve? So that's the expanded role of the trainer or the educator. And then the learner.
Right, which is an important part, obviously, the person who's going. And I do think that when Marla had mentioned earlier, it's happened a number of times when people have been in a class and have no idea why they're there. And you feel for them because they're just not set up. So I do think all of this is really important. So Marla talked a lot about obstacles, or really those disincentives for using the new skills. That's something that the learner, sometimes is faced with. And if that's not handled in an appropriate way, then all of the education is really for naught. So it's not really to get the learner to learn better and be better, but it's to really be able to understand how to use those skills in a very effective and efficient way for the organization. So as it says here, it says really having that dialogue with the manager pre and post. And I think that that's just key. You want to have that so that you can really, as the manager, let the learner know what those individual learning objectives really are and why that is so important for the organization itself. What role will they play in achieving that? Then it also really helps them to recognize and adopt, a real constructive reason for participating in the training, because you want to send them to the class so that they know what they're being sent there for, but also to encourage them to really be engaged. Anyone who's been a trainer, that's what you want. You want people who are going to be engaged and talk and share their stories and pieces like that. And so it will then help in terms of really helping to improve their performance when they get back. I think Marla talked a little bit about engaging learners in reflection, that adult learner cycle when they're taught something, and then have that ability in the class to really think about what they have just been, what they've seen, what's been shared with them, and reflect upon, okay, in my role, in my position, what does that really mean? And to really have the experience then in the classroom situation to actually share that, that's a beautiful way to really get people to start understanding what's really happening, and also connecting them with what the content is, and then how to really go back and actually practice that. And then the last one here is really the implementation plan. What is that? So to me, that's really, it's the manager who is talking to the learner, and it's a joint conversation. It's really talking about what they really need to come back with and what the best way is to apply what they've got. One second. And so I think that that's encouraging that dialogue with the managers. And I think that it's an ongoing one. We've talked about that you have it, there's that post, but you continue with it.
So one of the questions that came in was, are you seeing senior leaders resist the idea of training as a process versus an event? And Mary, I don't know if you have what your response is. My response is, I don't know that they resist it as much as it's a different concept. it's probably easier or more logical to think of more of that kind of check the box, have people go through training. And this isn't, I would say this isn't complicated, but it does require intention, and it does require a greater deal of collaboration than perhaps some organizations and some leaders have experienced. It's effort, and so I would get, when we look at the 100%, it's perhaps the same amount of effort, but it's really putting it in the different buckets. What would you add?
And I would just say it needs to continue. I'm sorry, I had to my throat got so dry. It just needs to continue so that when you come up with that plan, we always talk about that support and accountability. Well, part of that is on the manager and also on the learner. So if you don't feel that the manager is doing that, you would hope that they would try to raise that issue. But as the manager, it's really checking in with that person, seeing how it's going. Is it working? If it's not working, what are those barriers? Because initially, after the class and you meet, it's really, you need to continue that. And it, it should really be part of, that performance review, that opportunity to really meet with that person. And there's no question in my mind that if someone's sitting down and talking to you and actually encouraging you and curious about how that training went and what was it like and that kind of, I just think there is a lot of benefit to that. Plus the relationship that you build is just invaluable to me. So.
Well, I think about if you went to a training and no one ever asked about it again,
Right.
that sends a pretty strong message that was not important, right? It does, in the scheme of the work I do, it doesn't matter, because if nobody is asking me about it, if nobody is checking if I understood or if I'm applying it, I think it's a real missed opportunity.
And I think that managers then need to make sure that senior leaders understand who went, so that if they have that opportunity, if they see that person, it's not like giving, drilling them or giving them, too many questions about it, but it's just the idea that that person knows and they're just curious how they felt about it. Again, another really nice affirmation of why you went and how important it was. And we're thankful that you were able to attend. So.
Yeah. Comment from Becky. I was sent to a training that was check the box. I mean, and we've probably all been to that. So going to explore, and you will get these slides afterwards because a couple of these coming up are pretty content heavy. So let's talk about that 40% upfront. And we've already shared a lot in terms of what the manager does, what the senior leader does. But the two big ideas is to get learners informed about the training and then to get them prepared. So there's different things that you can do, and the you might be the trainer, might be the leader, might be the manager, but to think about just some very basic things about how do we invite people to come to training. I know some excellent educators that it's a personal invitation. Some of them have it where someone goes through the training and then they nominate the next person to go through the training. So it feels like it's an honor to go through a training. It's sharing what is that training about, what's that experience going to be like. And then the second part is getting learners prepared. So again, those things like what's going to be expected of me, how am I going to apply it? And then I'm a big fan of preparatory work. I know that there were some comments that came in the chat related to preparatory work. And again, it's about trying to create these sponges, this openness to learning here. And so this, I don't know why I was sent here versus I've been thinking about this, and the preparatory work shouldn't be burdensome. It should be to get them to think about things, to think about their own perspective. It might be to have a conversation with someone. It shouldn't be, hours and hours of work, but it's just something to prime that pump. So here you see a number of different, this is why I say you're going to get the slides. Here's a number of different strategies. I'll just point out a couple of them. The preparatory work that I mentioned. So it could be read an article, watch a video, interview someone, take this survey. I mentioned personal invitations. I like that example of partner with human resources. So particularly for the training team, but I think also for the managers to really look at training. Pre-training work can happen at the time of interview, at the time of hire. It doesn't have to be this formal orientation session. There's an opportunity when you're interviewing someone to be educating them on what your values are as an organization. What are those priorities and how will they be able to be a part of that? So these are some of the pre-training strategies. And then there's the things that happen during the training. And this is primarily the responsibility of the trainer and the learner. The top one, I'll just point out a couple of them. I'm big on connection points. So connecting the content to the organization's values. If you're doing a multiple day or a training that's held over consecutive weeks, to really be the one that has that thread of continuity to help link things together. I mentioned earlier about helping the learner to be in the driver's seat. We always say in our training that hopefully you'll learn something from us, but you're equally going to learn something from one another. And so share your thoughts, share your ideas. So to create that kind of an environment, many people refer to it as conversational learning, to have rich dialogue as part of the training. So here's many of the strategies to think about. If you ask for preparatory work, debrief it. I think it's the same thing of if nobody ever asks me, was it really important? And so if you ask them to do it, make a point to talk about it. Another debrief strategy is never do an activity without a debrief discussion. People don't learn, it says people don't learn from an experience, they learn from reflecting on their experience. And Mary, you talked about that. So don't shortchange it by just talking through things, but really couple the experience with that reflection. And then what's that application?
And I'm going to add one thing, and that is if you have a handout and because of time or something, you're not doing it, I also think it's critical that you cover that handout that you're not going to be able to cover in class, but at least acknowledge it so that people understand why it was part of their handout packet.
Good point. That's why I have you train with me, so that if I forget things like that, you cover these things. All right. I would say this is probably the most neglected aspect. You saw in the original breakdown, it was just 5% of resources. So when you think about what's the goals for post-training, I think it's threefold. It's to reinforce the learning, to help the learner to apply the learning, and then to evaluate the impact. And this is where there's a lot of opportunity to get creative. I'm reminded, and many of you might be familiar with Ebbinghaus and the forgetting curve. And so we forget the majority of what we learn. That's why this reinforcement is so important. So back in 1885, Ebbinghaus discovered the forgetting curve. And what we've come to understand is typically we lose 50% of what we learned after an hour. And I'll often say this when I'm teaching a class, it's like, it's nice to know that, half of this an hour from now is going to be gone. We lose about 70% after 24 hours and 90%, up to 90% after a week. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. There are things that you can do to reinforce and apply the learning. And so you see the different categories there. There are internal organizational systems that you can do. So you can remove the obstacles. We've talked about that in terms of the role of leaders and managers. You can utilize your own technology. So maybe it's an internal communication just to reinforce, oh, there's that reminder. Oh yeah, we said we were going to do that. Or I remember we learned about a learning circle. So let's do one in our next team meeting. Then there's also the interpersonal connection. So that's the one-on-one conversations. It might be peer mentors. The greenhouse model uses a lot of peer mentors in terms of reinforcing concepts and supporting team members. Then there's tools and resources, checklists, audits, different things that you might do as an organization to measure progress. And then this whole idea of micro learning, which is 3 to 5 minute bite-sized ways of reinforcing. It's not necessarily introducing new content, but reinforcing content that has been learned, just to remind people of, oh yeah, I remember we talked about that. So again, here are a lot of post-training strategies. Mary, I don't know if you have a favorite that you would pick out.
Well, I hadn't looked at all of them, but I would say I like the ongoing communication, formal and informal, to reinforce the concepts. I think that, I mean, there's so many. When I saw the slides, I'm like, oh my goodness, people are going to want that. I guess I could say micro learning, the bite size. It's so interesting when you talked about what we have lost in a week, and some of the virtual classes that I know some organizations are doing, you're meeting once a week. So yeah, that's a long span of time, and yet people can't handle, Zoom 8 hours a day, 7 days a week or something. So that's just, difficult.
Right. We've been teaching a class once a week. We have our last one this week. And so we've done their Zoom classes, but we've done Kahoot. So Kahoot is an inexpensive online game that you can do to reinforce the learning, just as like, oh, what are those 4 coaching skills? And just to trigger people's memories. I too like the micro learning. We do a lot of 1-pagers at the Greenhouse Project. This is what we talked about in this session. It's just that quick bullet of here's what we did and here's how you can apply it. So yes, we will get these to you, a lot of different ideas. Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you. I've got a few slides to share after this. And if people do have questions, go ahead and put that in the chat or the Q&A. But go ahead, Mary.
So this is just really the summary. I mean, like, it's really, putting that new lens on to really rethink how you're doing that learning, what kind of an organization do you want to be, and that, learning is a process, really not an event. So one thing that I think is always good when you end a session is like, so what are you going to commit to? So our last poll is going to ask you, what area do you intend to focus your efforts on? So Jenna, if you want to put up that last poll, number 4. And so I want to find out from you whether you want to get engagement of key players. Now, Marla, this is single choice. Okay, I just wanted to make sure in case people are very, very, like, oh, I want to do 3 of these. So get engagement of key players, like really talk to your leadership, the managers, you get them in line. Make a point to do a little more pre-training strategies. Improve how we are training, really try to, investigate doing a little bit more on post-training strategies. And then I know Marla asked you to type in questions in the chat, but if you have other thoughts for like what your next step is going to be, I think sometimes it's just nice to make that commitment after you've listened to this. So.
We will give you a moment to respond to that. I'm not able to, doesn't look like I can chat to everyone. I'm not seeing that as an option. Someone asked what was the tool that I mentioned. It is Kahoot. I think it's kahoot.it. So if you do a Google search, it will come.
So it's Kahoot, right? Isn't that what it is? Yeah. And I have to say, I'm just going to be, teaching a class with Marla. Sometimes I'll go, oh man, sometimes that's just really hard for people to do. Well, when we did it last week, it was unbelievable. People had such fun. And it really brought back those basic ideas. So I had to like step back and go, nope, it was a very good use of time. So there you go. So, we've got like, I don't know, it's like an even 29, 29, 29. People are either going to get engagement of key players, or they're going to really work on improving how they train, or they're really going to start investigating post-training strategies. So pretty cool. I like that. I like people thinking. Yeah.
Excellent. So one of the things that it said in there, I think it was during training, is to think about what's your adaptation, or what does this look like when you do online learning. And I think that e-learning is here to stay, and I think it's gotten somewhat of a bad rap because of a lot of the things that we've talked about in terms of how we set people up for success. And then how do we reinforce that? So we've ventured into online learning and e-learning specifically, and we are about to roll out our person-directed living certificate. I'm just going to roll through a couple of these slides, which again you'll get, so because you won't be able to read through all of them likely. But I think all of us have had that experience of self-paced training where it's just click, click, click. And we didn't want to put something out there. We wanted to make it interactive. We wanted to make it impactful. And we wanted to make it just with that path of that logic of training, that it really made an impact for the individual as well as the organization. And so it's focused on engaging experiential learning, interactive content, and real practical case studies and application. There's a lot of information on this slide. We've utilized that, the process or the idea of learning as a process, not an event. There's data and analytics. So from an organizational standpoint, to be able to track people that go through it, I think that's so important to have that learning, have that gamification and badging that creates that motivation. I think anytime you have e-learning, you can still implement these strategies that we've talked about with the pre, during, and post application. So here's some of the learning objectives. I'm going to keep going because we're almost out of time. And it's really based on what we have found to be true in terms of really leveraging the model and the empowered worker core value. And if you didn't get it, because it says greenhouse in the entire network, you get it now. We have created an alliance together. We are better together. You can come see us at Leading Age, and we have another session in this series talking about policy and how to make it less scary. So Alex Spanko is going to lead us next week through kind of a policy 101 session and how you can apply it into your environment. And if you joined us last week, or if you didn't, here's information. We are doing an online being a coaching leader 2-day workshop. And it's coming up in November, and there absolutely will be pre-work and post-work. And so sign up so you can start to do that pre-work for sure. I think that might be it. Mary, are there any? Oh, it says 2023. Thanks for catching that. It is not 2023. It is coming up in just over a month. So if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to learn@thegreenhouseproject.org.
Excellent.
Any questions that have come up? It's 4:00, so I didn't see any.
But I loved all the chats, though. I mean, that was great. I just want to thank all of you who participated for your engagement in this, because I love that. That's like the best.
There's a lot of educators on there, so we do have this energy when it comes to this topic. So thanks everybody. Be well, and we look forward to seeing you back on another webinar. Bye bye.
Take care.